Inventions with a twist now on BBC Two. Adam Hart-Davis in the East Midlands.
Hello and welcome to Local Heroes. This week I'm featuring you, or at least some of the viewers who responded to my challenges and made fire from the ice, hovercraft, scientific musical instruments and peanut separators. But first some heroes, and this week they're all from the East Midlands. This is Cromford Mill near Matlock in Derbyshire, and this is where mass mechanised manufacture began. The man who built all this lot started life as a humble barber and maker of perukes, that's wigs to you and me, but he became a great inventor and a fabulously rich businessman. He not only invented a machine to spin cotton, but he also arguably started the Industrial Revolution. Love him or loathe him, he was Richard Arkwright. Richard Arkwright was the youngest child in a poor family of 13 children. After failing in his wig-making enterprise, he went on to fail as the landlord of the Black Boy pub in Preston. However, all the while he was pondering a problem faced by the cloth industry in the north. The spinsters couldn't make thread fast enough. Spinning is quite a complicated operation. What you need to do is to tease and then twist. But Arkwright reckoned he could build a machine to do both halves of the operation. In fact, in 1765, the spinning jenny had been invented by James Hargreaves, but his machine wasn't very successful. Then 4 years later, Arkwright took out his own patent on a new piece of machinery for the making of weft and yarn from cotton, flax and wool. And since it was powered by a water wheel, it became known as a water frame. I've got my own spinning machine and I've set it up exactly where he had his water frames. Look at the floor. Look, there are dark stripes, which is where the machine stood, and there are white bits, which is where the workers stood and actually wore away the floorboards with their feet. Now, the bicycle hadn't been invented in 1770, but I'm sure he would have built a bike-powered spinning machine if he'd had a bicycle. I'm going to start not with handfuls of wool like I had with the spinning wheel, but with this stuff. This has been pulled out into sort of sausages. It's called roving. But you'll see it's got absolutely no strength. I only give it the slightest pull and it just separates. So in order to spin this, I need to tease it out and then twist it, and that'll make it into thread. Okay, I'm going to use the bike. The chain is going to come off the chain wheel here and come up to these rollers. There are 1, 2, 3 sets of rollers, and the roving is going to go over all three, and you'll see that they're geared up so that this one goes slowly, this one goes a bit faster, and this one goes faster still, actually about 3 times as fast as the first one. And that means that the roving will be stretched out or teased to 3 times its original length. And then all I need to do is twist it and I'll have my thread. So there we are, it's guided over there. I need to put those rollers on top, they're covered with rubber to grip that roving nice and tightly. Now I just need to put in the twist. And to do that, I've got the chain which runs down to this lot of cogs and turns this axle here. And that turns this old drill, and that in turn turns this flyer, which whistles round, and it scoops up the roving and twists it and winds it on the bobbin. Now, all I need to do is pedal. No skill required. Just look at this. Fantastic automation. And it does all the teasing and twisting for me. And the thread winds up on my bobbin. Now the question is, does it really work? I want to put it to the test. Here's a bit that I've just spun. Is it strong? Yeah, look at that. You can break it, but it's really, it's quite strong. It requires a good, oh no, that hasn't twisted so well. It must be untwisting as I pull it off. Look at that, that's good thread that's good solid thread with a twist in it. It really works. Before Arkwright could make all his machines, he needed somewhere to put them. And he decided to build one big factory and put all the machines in it together. The first factory of all was this one. This is the original, built in 1771, and it had 5 floors. And the whole of the machinery was powered by a water wheel. You can see the water came out of that channel there, from the stream across the road, over here, over the water wheel, which must have been just here. You can see that round bit, which is where the shaft was. And that provided power for the entire factory. And this is the real thing. This is the world's only surviving Arkwright water frame. Fantastic beast, isn't it? If you look, there are 24 bobbins along here, 24 more the other side, and another 48 at that end of the machine, 96 altogether. And one person would drive all these 48 here and all the 48 on the next machine. One person could spin 96 threads at the same time. Fantastic. Now the drive came up here. This would have been powered by a water wheel. Today it's powered by an electric motor. And then it's transferred to here, and I can start these 4 just with a finger like that. And now you can see that the roving is coming from these bobbins up here. You can see them slowly rotating. It goes over that rod at the back, down through these 3 sets of rollers, and then the thread spun is taken up on these bobbins down here. Arkwright was not what you could have called a gentleman. Carlyle described him as a gross, bag-cheeked, pot-bellied Lancashire man with the air of painful reflection, yet also of copious free digestion. This is Willersley Castle in Cromford. It was designed and built by Arkwright, so it's not surprising that it looks a bit like a mill with turrets. Richard Arkwright was a great inventor and a brilliant businessman, but he left us a rather more sinister legacy. The idea of mass production by cheap labour. The result is that now factories are built wherever in the world labour is cheap. And as a result, nobody in this country is paid to spin cotton in factories anymore. So, if you like, Richard Arkwright created unemployment. I get a puncture about once every 500 miles, and when I have a problem like that, I need the right tools to tackle it with. Now, the best tools to get the tyre off the rim are tyre levers. You can use spoons, you can use screwdrivers if you're desperate, but tyre levers are the best. My next hero invented a tool to solve problems in physics, and it was a mathematical tool, which is odd because he wasn't a physicist, he wasn't even a mathematician. He was a miller, and this was his windmill. His name was George Green. Green spent only a year at school when he was 8, and then in 1807, just outside Nottingham in the village of Sneinton, his dad built this windmill and set his son to work in it. So it's all the more surprising that George Green invented a crucial mathematical tool that is used by physicists and mathematicians even today. Every day when the wind was blowing, he would come here in the mill to grind corn. Now, they actually employed a manager to run the mill, and the manager's house was built right onto the side of the windmill here. In fact, this white stuff here is the remains of the plaster from the manager's front room. George got very friendly with the manager's daughter, Jane Smith. Indeed, they had 7 children together, and yet, for some reason, they never got married. When his dad died, young George inherited the mill. But increasingly he found the work of milling irksome, as he put it. So he left the day-to-day business to his manager, and he concentrated on what he enjoyed doing, which curiously wasn't stamp collecting or something like that, but mathematics. Amazingly complicated, continental-style mathematics. The 100-year-old work of Isaac Newton still ruled British maths in Green's time, and the academics stubbornly refused to use any of the ideas based on the work of Newton's arch-rival from Germany, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Unfortunately, Leibniz's continental maths turned out to be better than Newton's, but virtually nobody in Britain knew anything about it. In 1828, George Green published an essay, a mathematical essay all about static electricity, using the most fantastically complicated continental mathematics. George had to pay out of his own pocket to get his essay printed. So what he did was put an ad in the local paper inviting people to subscribe. And they did. 51 of them coughed up 7 and 6pence, which was very expensive for an essay. He printed 100 copies, and when those 51 got their copies, they must have been a bit shocked. If you look at this, the title is An Essay on the Application of Mathematical Analysis to the Theories of Electricity and Magnetism. Snappy title, isn't it? Well, just look at the text. It's absolutely unbelievable. I can't believe many of those people can possibly have read this. But one person who did was a chap called Sir Edward Bromhead, who'd actually studied maths at Cambridge, and he understood it, and he realised that this was very important. He wrote to George at once and said George ought to get this essay published in London so everyone could see it. But George thought he was just being polite, and he didn't feel sort of able to write back to a knight of the realm, and it took him 18 months to reply to Bromhead's letter. Well, eventually, Bromhead persuaded Green to go to Cambridge, and in due course he became a fellow of Gonville and Caius College. Unfortunately, Cambridge society didn't really agree with him. He was only a humble miller, and he eventually succumbed to miller's disease from breathing all the dust in the mill here. And in 1841, he died, and his essay lay lost and forgotten until 4 years later. In 1845, William Thompson was a student at Cambridge. He was keen on continental maths, and he had heard of Green's essay, but he couldn't find a copy, until he asked one of Green's old tutors, who just happened to have 3 copies lying around. Thompson read the essay on top of the stagecoach on his way to Paris, with growing excitement. When he got there, he showed all his French colleagues, and they were even more excited because they realised that Green's work solved all the problems they'd been working on. His essay was rediscovered. There's a chunk in Green's essay which came to be called Green's theorem. And because it's a mathematical tool, it's quite hard to explain what it is, but I have begun to understand what you can do with it. And here's a rather simple example. Imagine that this wooden square is a disco, and the white bit in the middle is the dance floor. Now, I'm not a great dancer, so I'm sitting here on this edge with my Bacardi and Coke, watching all the goings-on. Now, there are loads and loads of people on the dance floor. I can only see a little edge here, but I can see who's coming and going across that edge. And knowing just that much, I can work out who's coming and going all the way round, how many people are crossing the edge of the dance floor. And using Green's theorem, I can then work out the total population of the dance floor, how many people are heaving about on there. And there is an example of its use. This is a simple example, but the brilliant thing about Green's theorem is that it can be applied to anything from how much charge is in a microchip to problems in acoustics, magnetism, and even hydrodynamics. George Green wrote his essay in the time of classical physics. Then 100 years after his death, a new generation of physicists, quantum physicists, discovered Green's work all over again. In fact, now it seems that every year another bunch of scientists can use George Green's mathematical tools. Here's his grave at the bottom of the hill within sight of the windmill. There he is, George Green, Esquire, BA, and there's Jane buried in the next door grave. In 1930, Albert Einstein came to Nottingham to give a lecture, and he was so impressed with George Green's work, he was going to come here and visit the grave, but he missed his train. So I've come instead to pay tribute to George Green, the mathematical miller. According to myth and legend, my next hero invented the cat flap, and thereby solved a problem for cat owners all over the world. How to let the cat in or out without having to get up and open the door. He was born right here at Woolsthorpe in Lincolnshire, and in this very house he did some of the finest work in maths and physics ever done in the history of science. His name was Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day, but was not expected to survive even until Boxing Day. He was so small they said he would have fitted into a pint pot. However, he did survive, and he grew up to be a sober, silent, thinking lad. In 1665, Newton was a student at Cambridge, but then the plague came along and the whole university was closed down, so he came home to Woolsthorpe, and then began a year that changed science. It was Newton's annus mirabilis, his miraculous year. Writing to the Royal Society, Newton said, "In the beginning of the year 1666, I procured me a triangular glass prism to try therewith the celebrated phenomena of colours." And he did the work in his study right here. Newton took his prism, he put it on the windowsill, cut a hole in his mum's best curtains and allowed just a spot of sunlight to shine through the prism. Unfortunately, the sun's gone in now, and I've got to use a projector, which I've got down here, which makes a spot of light. And I'll shine that spot of light through my prism here. Now, various people have looked at the effect of this, like Robert Hooke and Robert Boyle, and they'd seen that what you get is a coloured spot of light. You see it's got a bit of blue at one side and a bit of sort of mucky, orangey yellow at the other. And they thought that the prism was staining the light, putting those colours into it. Newton had a different idea. He reckoned that sunlight was actually made up of a whole lot of different colours, and that they were being bent by the prism to different extents. Some colours bent more than others and were being separated out. And so he put his prism on the windowsill and shone the light right across the room to the other wall to get the most beautiful spectrum with a load of different colours. And he noticed it was all spread out as though there were separate spots, a red spot and a yellow spot and so on, all slightly overlapping. Now, in order to try and prove his point, that the sunlight was made of all these separate colours, he devised an experimentum crucis, a crucial experiment. The first thing he did was to put in a slit, like this, to sharpen up the original spectrum. And then he went over to the other side of the room, and here's that nice sharp spectrum. He put a second slit. Now watch what happens. When I put the slit there, you can see red light coming through onto the card behind. And if I move the slit, then I just get yellow light coming through. Move the slit again, I get just green coming through. So suppose I leave it there is only green light coming through the slit. What will happen if I put in a second prism? Now, according to Hooke and Boyle, this second prism will stain that green light into different colours. But Newton said, no, all it'll do is bend it and you'll still get green light. So let's bring up another screen and see what we get. Look, it's green. And it doesn't matter how I twist that prism, it changes the position, but the light stays green. It's not stained different colours. And so Newton had proved his point. And here, in this very room, he became the first person in the world to understand the colours of the rainbow. It may have been while he was doing these experiments that he invented the cat flap. The problem was that his moggy would push open the door and creep into the study and disturb his experiments. So he cut a hole in the door and put a bit of cloth over it so that the cat could come and go as it pleased. This is where myth takes over from reality. According to myth, Newton was sitting here in the kitchen reading a book by Galileo, a dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. Galileo was talking about how things fall. Newton already knew about the work of Johannes Kepler describing the motion of the planets going around the sun, and he wondered whether he could link the two ideas. He got up and went out into the garden to muse over the problem and sat down by the apple trees. The answer came in a flash of inspiration, as he put it, occasioned by the fall of an apple. If the apple fell to earth here in Woolsthorpe, how high does the pull go that pulls the apple down? What if it went all the way up to the moon? And then he sat down and did some sums. And he would no doubt have used the back of an envelope, but envelopes hadn't been invented, so he used one of his mum's leases. And the sums he did became his universal theory of gravitation, which explained not only the fall of an apple, but why the moon goes round the Earth, and why all the planets go round the sun. At least, that's the legend. In fact, those first sums he did in 1666, he said, answered pretty nearly, which was amazing for somebody who solved the whole problems of gravity. But actually sorting out all the details took him more than 20 years. And the story about the apple didn't appear at all until 1725, when he was 80. I suspect he may have made it up long after the event to prove what a genius he'd been as a young man. Isaac Newton was a very difficult man to get on with. He was cantankerous and argumentative. He couldn't accept any sort of criticism. And yet, occasionally, he could be quite modest about himself too. And he once said, "If I have seen a little further than others, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants." And that's exactly what's written on the edge of the £2 coin. Now it's time to meet some heroic viewers. I've put out various challenges and you've come up with some amazing machines. I've called all the best ones here to Armley Mills Industrial Museum in Leeds to see how they work. The American scientist Benjamin Franklin invented a beautiful musical instrument, the glass harmonica. The question was, could you invent a scientific musical instrument? Now, Tim, we were going to make musical instruments, but you seem to have brought along an old rubber glove and a pop bottle.
That's right. Well, it is a musical instrument. It's my Wasserflütchen.
Ah, I thought so, yes. What on earth is that?
The idea is you push the water up and down inside the column of air. That
Right.
varies the pitch.
Right.
It is.
Oh, wonderful. Elegant and a joy to listen to.
Right.
Mark, you appear to have an old kitchen tap and a bit of wood here. What is it?
Right, this is my Heli-racket.
Heli-racket.
Heli-racket, because
Right.
it uses helium as well as air with the different densities of the gas to actually change the pitch of the note. So we've got the low note here, which is air,
Air.
and then we put through, and we've got high note here, which is helium, and then we can actually create the changes in the notes.
Very elegant and very, very scientific. Now, Phil and John, you've got an amazing array of empty bottles here. You didn't have to empty all these bottles yourselves, did you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so, yeah.
How awful. What do you call this
It's
instrument?
called champagne flute.
A champagne flute. And there's a different amount of water in each bottle, I see. OK, play away. And now for the percussion section.
10, 8,
So you're changing the pressure inside, and that'll change the note, and you've got a pressure gauge here so we can see what the pressure is.
8, 4,
That was brilliant. Now, the real challenge was, could you play a tune like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Is everyone ready? 1, 2, 3, go! Now, the hovercraft challenge. When I was celebrating the work of Sir Christopher Cockerell, I made a low-tech hovercraft and it travelled at least that far. I challenged you to do better. Now, Tim and Phil, you appear to have just a couple of cardboard boxes. Surely you can't lift that up on your own.
No, so we've brought along a hairdryer.
But this is a motor.
Yes, but it's not attached to the craft, it's only providing a bit more wind.
All right, we'll let you get away with it. Let's see. Oh, it does hover beautifully, doesn't it? Alex, Philip and Sophie, you've clearly got a coleslaw packet powered by a balloon. OK, let's see if it works when it's assembled. Oh, yes, that's good. It hovers well, doesn't it? Now, Brian, you've got a really elegant machine here. This is terrific. I can see it's going to be powered by pulling the string on this spindle, and that's going to make this impeller spin round and push the air out there. Now, the question is, will it work?
I hope so. It has done on trials, but...
Let's have a go. Yeah! Now, Jim, this is a beautiful thing.
Large inlet hole on top where the balloon fits, and 32 1mm holes around the edge.
Oh, wow. And your balloon slides in?
And the balloon fits into that
Very elegant.
quick release device.
Oh, fantastic. Now, what I actually asked everyone to do was to make a hovercraft that would go 1 metre across water. Can they do it? Right, are you all ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, go! Well, it's Jim's machine marginally ahead of Alex's. The hairdryer's coming up. Jim's is slowed down. Alex's machine's got about a foot. Unfortunately, Brian's machine seems to have sunk without trace, and I'm going to award the prize to Jim because his, under its own steam, very nearly made the course. Thank you very much indeed. Well done, everybody. I reckon the most difficult challenge was to make fire from the ice. William Scoresby Jr., the whaler and scientist, claimed that while he was stuck off Greenland, he made a lens out of ice and used it to light his sailors' pipes with the rays from the sun. Well, I failed to do it in Whitby, but I'm delighted to say that Georgina and Charlie managed it. Let's have a look at your video.
So what we did is we stretched some cling film over a bowl and we tipped water in it gradually, and then we put it in the freezer.
This is the lens being taken very carefully by Michael Hicks from the fridge.
What did you try and set fire to?
A piece of black advertisement on a newspaper.
Oh, I see. Why the black?
So it would absorb more heat.
It's burning!
It's burning!
It's burning!
We have successfully made.
Yay, we did it! This is a hole, and just to prove it's a hole, there's my finger through it.
I was going to
Made fire out of ice.
Well, that's absolutely brilliant. Well done. Thank you very much, both of you. William Scoresby Jr. would have been proud of you. Now, the peanut challenge. I asked whether you could separate dry roasted peanuts from ordinary peanuts. And they're very, very similar, so that's a difficult challenge. This is following in the footsteps of Richard Singh. And thanks to all the relatives who wrote and told me how to pronounce his name, he was a Nobel Prize winner who separated very similar chemicals by using 2 liquids. Now, Tim, what did you try?
Well, we tried sugar water,
Right.
and acetone in water,
Acetone? That's horrible stuff.
detergent in water,
Yeah.
and water on its own.
And what worked in the end?
Salt water.
Salt water.
Salt water.
Okay, so what are you actually going to do? Just tell me.
Well, we're going to pour this olive oil
Yeah.
down this triangle here.
Right. And you've got a mixture of the 2 in here?
Yeah.
Okay, show me. Okay, so that floats across the top. Oh, I see. And it's carrying these ones with it. And which ones are these?
They're the dry roasted.
Dry roasted. So they stay on the top,
Yes.
and the olive oil sweeps them along, and the others sit at the bottom of the salt water.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. So you only need a bit more olive oil, and a whole lot will be separated.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Rob, you've just got a bowl of lemonade and a hairdryer. How are you going to do it with those?
I'm going to use the carbon dioxide in the lemonade to stick to the surface of the dry roasted peanuts and bring them up to the top.
Right, so they will float.
And the salted peanuts, they're much smoother, and so they just bob up and down in the lemonade.
Okay, so what happens with the hairdryer?
Oh, I'm going to use the hairdryer to blow the dry roasted peanuts from one side to the other.
Because they're sitting on the top. Right, let's see if it works. Fantastic. Look at that. 3 seconds or something and the whole lot is separate. I'm very impressed. Great. Many thanks to everyone who wrote in, and thanks to all of you for your brilliant inventions. And just in case you feel inspired to build anything else, we're going to give you each a copy of the Local Heroes Do-It-Yourself Science book. Now, I'm afraid that's all the heroes for this week, and indeed all the heroes for this series. So, goodbye, and see you next time!
Adam Hart Davis is back in the autumn with a new series, What Did the Romans Do For Us? And in the meantime, keep an eye on BBC Online at bbc.co.uk/history. We're preparing to make an explosive entrance, a new series for BBC Two, Master Blasters, next. To find out how to give your time doing something you enjoy, visit Timebank at bbc.co.uk/timebank.